First, from our Newsmax newsroom, the host of The Hardline, Ed Berliner. From Newsmax Washington, the professor of international business at the University of Maryland and columnist Peter Morici. And via Skype from Connecticut, the former lieutenant governor of the great state of New York, Betsy McCaughey. Betsy, first to you, let me ask you your take on Donald winning some tonight and Cruz coming up with two important victories.
Well, it definitely narrows the race. It clarifies it for everyone on the Republican side. I think actually the biggest event tonight, however, was the way that Hillary Clinton crushed Bernie Sanders in all the southern states. Actually a 2-to-1 victory in every one of those states. And she did it by winning almost all of the black vote. But here's the hitch. She did it with poisonous lies that were designed to foment racial tensions. She told blacks all across America that they are the victims of discrimination, systemic racism. She blamed poverty and incarceration on deliberate racism. And this unsubstantiated and untrue charge is making her campaign really a campaign of hate, a campaign against whites, a war on whites.
Well, Betsy and others on the panel, we heard in various articles, including what we saw in the New York Times today, that the advice came for Hillary to try to run to the left to emulate Bernie Sanders. And yet Peter Morici, as we saw tonight in Oklahoma, there was Bernie Sanders winning in what used to be called, quote, the Indian Territory. Now, I don't know if he was following on the tradition of the great populist Fred Harris, but how do you account for Bernie's win there in the Sooner State tonight?
Well, Bernie does have some appeal, and Hillary's racist line doesn't work as well there as it does, say, in Georgia. It's that simple. I mean, Hillary's got a very precise plan, and that is to convince women that they're still victims, even though, for example, universities give 60% of the diplomas to women, and young women earn more than young men, and so on and so forth. And to convince blacks that they continue to be the victims of systemic discrimination. If you put together women and Hispanics, you know, by derivation, and blacks, and tell them that white guys are doing them in, I would suggest to you Hillary Clinton is not running a campaign against white people. She's running a campaign against white men. You know, my view about Hillary is in 16, Clinton in 16, only if you hate your son.
Oh, okay. Well, let's move from that and go back to the Republican side of things, and let's call on my colleague Ed Berliner, waiting patiently in our Newsmax newsroom. Question to you, Ed. Did Ted Cruz tonight, in the statement he just made in Texas, effectively make this a two-man race, Cruz versus Trump?
Certainly, I think it's a two-man race. That's all that's left at this point. Look, let's be very honest here. Governor Kasich needs to go, Ben Carson needs to go, and Marco Rubio hasn't won anything to this point. He may have all the money working for him right now and a lot of people giving him cash to head towards Florida, but he simply can't do it. It is a Ted Cruz versus Donald Trump run. Whether or not that the two of them can sustain that, whether or not Cruz can get any closer until the convention, is going to be the issue here right now. Look, JD, as a journalist first more than anything else, I can look at this objectively. And something that we talked about earlier this evening on your show, and we talked about on the Hardline earlier tonight, and I can't say it enough. There is a civil war coming in the Republican Party. The civil war will be at the convention. It will be between people who follow Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. And look, let's get rid of this nonsense about Mitt Romney getting in, Jesse Ventura getting in, Michael Bloomberg getting in. This is ridiculous. We've heard this all in the last 24 hours. The problem with it is even hardcore Republicans look at these two men, Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, and not all of them are concerned they want to vote for either one of them, JD. That's the biggest point right now. Donald Trump says he can win Hispanics. He cannot. 11% of the Hispanics in the United States say that they favor Donald Trump. Most of them say they do not favor him. He has to win the independents. He hasn't shown that he can do that yet. And you and I both know in any sort of an election, you have to have some sort of a defection. Here's one of those great fallacies. A report that came out today that talked about 20,000 people in Massachusetts leaving the Democratic Party, and there was an inference that they went to the Republican Party. Nonsense. I lived in Massachusetts and New England for 4 years. Democrats in Massachusetts hate Republicans. They think they are a disease that needs to be squashed. They would never go to the Republican side. So let's start dealing with some realities here. It has to be the two of them. It's eventually got to come down to policies. It has to come down to what you can do. Ted Cruz has got to start making some sense in what he says, and Donald Trump has got to start telling people what he's going to do specifically, instead of every speech coming out saying, I'm going to build a wall and we're going to take care of trade with China. Peter and I have talked about this many
And
times.
let's let
Betsy and I
Betsy
have talked
talk.
about
Wait a
this,
second.
but they have
Wait
to
a
get
second.
down to
Even
specifics,
tonight-
or there will be a civil war that will rip this party apart, and it might not be a bad idea.
Go ahead, Betsy.
Well, even tonight, Donald Trump took an unconventional approach. Instead of giving just another hot air speech, he held a press conference and did provide quite a few specifics, including a more thorough discussion of his tax policies and how he plans on bringing jobs back to the United States and discouraging corporations from taking their headquarters and their capital and moving to other countries. So I think that Donald Trump assumed a new demeanor as a more presidential demeanor
It's
tonight.
about time.
Well, and the fact is that he is moving into a new phase of his campaign.
Peter
That's
Morici.
what I saw tonight.
Peter Morici, we got about a minute left before the break. The last word on campaigning and being aspirational, painting a picture without filling in all the details. That's wise campaigning. Can it work for Mr. Trump?
It has to work. Hillary Clinton's motto tonight in her speech was breaking through barriers. His motto has to be renewing America, and then offer the specifics that Ed talked about. I believe the essentials are there if he steps down from some of his ridiculous claims like building a wall. But there are other things he can do about immigration, and there are things he can do about taxes, and his trade policies are quite reasonable.
Yes.
I think he needs to wrap those into a package and explain it in a way that he says, I'm going to create opportunities for you to prosper again and not depend on the government. If he does that, then he's got a shot at winning. But the Republicans have to get over it. They've lost control of the party because they've failed their constituents.
And I cannot fail to pay attention to the clock. Ed Berliner and Betsy McCaughey, our thanks to you. Peter Morici, we'd like you to hang out a little bit more with us to talk some about trade policy. And don't you trade in your time. Stay with us. There's more of our Super Tuesday coverage ahead.